Hey, I'm Kobe, a health and fitness coach for women over 40. And if you are a woman over 40 going through a different phase of life where your body's starting to feel different, fitness and nutrition isn't working quite the same as it used to, then I'm here to help you. In this video, we will talk about the 80-20 method. And this is originally a coaching call that I did with the women inside of my membership program. And I thought it was super important and super impactful, also very simple, a way to incorporate nutrition into your life that doesn't feel like you're restricting, because we've all done that too many times. If you are in your 40th or 50th decade, there's been restriction diets in your life, I'm quite sure. And if you're here now, you're looking for something new. This 80-20 method is a way to balance your hormones, to reduce inflammation in the body, and also a way that you don't have to give up all of your favorite foods. So if you're looking for something like that, then this video is for you. In here, you'll... Excellent. So essentially this 80-20 method is going to help balance our hormones. I put there as the main thing, but basically it's going to help reduce inflammation throughout the entire body, which just makes all the body processes that much easier, especially all the things that the liver is responsible for. So the liver, I just kind of thought it was one of those like non-organs. I mean, not obviously it has jobs, but I just never really heard about it unless, you hear about people who are excessive drinkers or drug takers and their liver isn't very happy. But the liver has so many important functions in the body that it really doesn't get all the credit it deserves. It really doesn't. It is absolutely vital, and it has numerous essential functions that are crucial for overall health. I just want to share a little anecdote because it just came to mind about the liver. The liver is the only organ that can actually reproduce itself. So when I had my accident in 2020, my spleen was removed and part of my stomach was removed. Obviously, there's space within my body that these organs used to occupy. When I went for a follow-up scan or ultrasound, once I got back to Canada, I went for a follow-up ultrasound, and the technician was like, "Oh, I thought it says in your chart that your spleen was removed." And I was like, "Yeah, it was." And she's like, "Yeah, and like part of your stomach, but I can see them here." I'm like, "Pardon?" They've been lying to me this whole time. She's like, "No, I can see the spleen is here." But it turned out it wasn't. It was just that the liver had taken the shape of my spleen, and where it was located, it just filled that space with the exact shape that my spleen was. So it actually looked like my spleen on the scan, which I thought was actually kind of funny. Anyway, little anecdote, unnecessary, but sometimes amusing. So one of the roles of the liver is to detoxify the body, and that includes ridding our body of the excess hormones that are strolling around through the bloodstream. So once the liver gets a hold of them, it wants to process them out because our body continuously produces hormones. Once they've done their job, it's the liver's job to then process them out, put them into the large intestine so that we can rid them out from the colon. However, when the liver is working on managing inflammation through environmental and nutritional and hormonal toxins, it may get overloaded, and then it can't necessarily work as efficiently if it has so much work to do, so much extra work to do. Some of the symptoms of an overloaded liver are weight gain, fatigue, less energy through workouts, headaches, and all of these three in particular are due to the heavy load, toxic load in the body. So if the liver is having to work extra hard, then that's where the fatigue and the less energy can come from. And then there's going to be potentially multiple and varied emotional symptoms due to the excess of and variety of hormones present, because all of our different hormones have a different reaction or function for our mood. So hormones are processed out by the liver. We learned that. And there's two that especially, and these two work together. Your paragraph text is not supposed to be there, but the cortisol and insulin hormones work together. So when one is high, then the other is high. And if the liver has higher levels of these two or any of them, it can't necessarily process these out as quickly or as efficiently when there's a backlog. And that means they won't be able to exit through the large intestine, as we mentioned before. One of the best ways that we can support the liver through this process and through, anti-inflammatory and detoxifying is through the foods that we eat. Considering that the foods that we eat are a big contributor sometimes to our inflammation. So this is where the 80-20 quality method comes in. And that's because food quality matters. When we eat processed foods, inflammation increases, and this makes our liver and our hormones work harder. Our hormones are sensitive to toxins, chemicals, and additives in processed foods. So this can create chronic inflammation, which is the long-term activation of our immune system. And that means that our body is working harder than it needs to regulate itself and to flush out all these extra toxins, creating chronic inflammation. And over time, chronic inflammation can lead to damage in the arteries and the organs and the joints, increasing our risk of heart disease, arthritis, and other related conditions. So when we can bring chronic inflammation down in the body through what we're eating, it's going to make the liver's job that much easier. So how can we actually do that then with what we're eating? To eat real whole food 80% of the time. So we think things that grow, things that run, things that swim and that fly, as closest to their natural state as possible. And food in this natural state contains the micronutrients, macronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals to support our hormones, to support our liver. And when it's in its most natural state, all of our organs, all of our systems know what to do with it that much easier and that much better, and does not have to work nearly as hard to process it. So when we focus on anti-inflammatory foods, especially, that's going to reduce that chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation comes from a number of different things. When we can control the way that the food is reacting in our body, then it's going to be that much easier for our body to process the other inflammatory type things like in our environment. So foods like fruit and vegetables, especially the brightly colored ones, whole grains, legumes, fish, poultry, nuts, seeds, and oils from these nuts and seeds. And the less that they have gone through any sort of processing, the better and more anti-inflammatory they're going to be. So let's think of an action step. Now that we know that basic information, when we there's a couple things that we can do to kind of see where we're at in terms of this 80-20. So I recommend to take a 5-day food record and then give it a quality ratio. And whatever you notice on there that can be shifted to bring it closer to an 80-20, highlight those things and either add in. So when I say add, I generally mean add in more vegetables, because that's often where many of us are missing out on one of the macronutrients. It's often vegetables, because half a plate is our goal, and mostly that's not the case for many of us. So add in lots of vegetables, more brightly colored the better, a biggest variety as you possibly can. And you can also swap out some foods or replace some foods to make it closer to this 80%. So swap or replace things to bring them closer to their natural state, closer to their more fibrous state. And so if there's anything that you might get from a package that you could swap out for something more authentic from its original condition, then that's going to be much easier on the body. There's also highlight some of the recipes or the meals, either in your recipe book from the plan or ones that you already like to eat and like to include in your weekly meals. Highlight some of these recipes that will support this 80%, and potentially if there's some that you have been eating or that you have maybe you've stopped eating them because you're like, oh, these aren't healthy, is there any way that you can transition them to become closer to that 80%? Is there anything you can add to them or anything you can swap out or replace to bring it into that more 80%? And then the second action step, so the 5-day food record, actually, I'll just say this about the 5-day food record, have it be some weekdays and then some weekend days as well. I think that gives us a more realistic picture of where we are at when it's weekend and weekdays both, because sometimes we eat a little differently on the weekends and the weekdays. So it gives us a more accurate picture. And I'll also say that it doesn't have to be a complete shift right away, because if you're noticing that in this food record, you seem to be more, instead of 80, or down more into the like 40 or 50 range, then bring it up closer to the 80 without thinking that you need to swap out everything altogether. If you can do it in a more sustainable way by slowing things down a little bit, then it's much more likely to become real in your life. It's more of a reality when we can do it in a slower sort of way, and then just add things little by little, getting up closer to that 80%. And then that 20%, that gets to be your foods that don't necessarily support you, because that 80% or that close to 80% is doing so much good. There's so many micronutrients and macronutrients that are supporting your liver and your entire body. Then that 20% can just be, if you want to enjoy a friggin' ice cream or whatever, then go for it. I don't think that we should have to deny ourselves the things that, the foods in particular, that actually do bring us joy. And the last thing is a food mood journal. And so this really brings awareness into how we feel during and then after we eat something. So often if it's a habit to eat a certain way, or you just, you eat this certain food and that's just kind of what you've always had, if you check in after you've eaten that food, and then it can be directly after, maybe it gets a few hours after, check in and see like, how do I feel? Like, has it changed the way I feel physically? Has it changed how I'm feeling mentally or spiritually? And see what sort of correlations you come up with. I have actually a really interesting anecdote about that, and I don't know why this is the case. I have no idea, because technically Boom Chicka Pop is fairly decent, but I noticed that when I eat it in excess, I get real grouchy. And that happened to me yesterday. I had 3 bowls, which is excessive, yes. And I felt so grouchy, which is not the first time that's happened. I experimented with that about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I noticed it for the first time and I thought it was maybe coincidence, but I experimented with it a few more times and I noticed that it is not a coincidence. If I have it for multiple days in a row, or multiple bowls in a row in one day, it affects my actual like mental state. It's very interesting. So it's an interesting experiment to take a food mood journal, and you can do this for whatever time period. It can be the same 5-day time period that you do your food record if you want, but it's just an interesting experiment, and it really brings awareness into what foods make us feel good physically and mentally, and then what foods maybe don't, that we didn't recognize before. So that is the action step that I'd like to see if you can take. So the 5-day food record, and then a food mood journal, and just include that sometime within the next week or two, and then just have a little experiment and see what you notice about that. I'm going to stop share. There we go. All right. So once you guys do that, and if anybody watching this, or if you're watching the recording, or if you're on here live, once you do those things, and if there's anything you want to share in the group, that would be cool, because I think that it's another way we can connect with each other, so that we don't feel like we're alone doing this stuff. So